So I guess I have to follow up a video talking about the Boxer by talking about another set that came out in 2002, one of the other boxed sets. I figure I'll focus on the Exotoa in its own video a little bit later on down the road, but I wanted to go ahead and take a look at the Bahrag, specifically looking at Kadak here. And yeah, I know it's a bit of a misnomer since it is the blue Bahrag. You would expect this one to be Gadak, but no, Kadak, whatever. Call it whatever you want. That said, in a lot of ways, this is also kind of like the last hurrah, if you will, of the classic style Rahi. It's not a Rahi in the story, but for all intents and purposes, for the build and just the overall aesthetic of the build, I think it is something you could easily classify as being a Rahi, right? So in the story, this plays a role as the Bahrag Queen. There are two of them, obviously one in blue here, one in red, not pictured. I'm missing literally just one piece from it somehow. But overall, I think it's a really fun build. Aesthetically, it's a very clean look. It has just two colors for the most part. Obviously, you've got some gunmetal touches on there as well, but mostly just the solid primary color in that blue and the dark gray, a color that'd be much more prevalent for years to come. Really kind of started with these sets though, to be honest, but I think here it looks very good. It's a very fresh aesthetic, and obviously the combination model between Kadak and Gadak is kind of a mess, let's be honest. And in terms of the colors, if this was working with a third color in here, say maybe a medium blue on this one and an orange on the Gadak set, I think after a while it'd get a bit messy to make a combination. So having the dark gray be its sort of secondary color and neutral color is a pretty smart idea overall. Functionally, the function is pretty straightforward. In fact, I can go ahead and try taking off one of these legs for you, hopefully without breaking the whole thing apart. There we go. So you can see just exactly what is going on the inside of the model. There is a trigger right here, very easy to hold onto the model itself. It's got a handle here for you to wrap your fingers around, and you just pull that trigger. As you continue to pull it, the entire motion of the neck leans forward until eventually these two bits of lift arm here connect with the back of the head and they push it forward. When they push it forward, the gear on the back of the head disengages with the much larger gear in the neck, and thus the rubber bands are able to pull the top jaw down. It's similar in some ways to the Muwaka and Kanera as an experience as what it is trying to do, but it does so in a very different way, and I appreciate that. It also has more of a lunge to it rather than something like the Muwaka or Kanera, which have an extension in their neck, right? That scissor joint, which allows their neck to sort of go parallel the body rather than this one, which rocks around the body. It's a very neat aesthetic, and it's very sort of feature rich, and it's something that you see a lot with the Bahrag sets from 2002. So I think it really fits with a model like this one. However, I will definitely say that the momentum helps with this model, because if you just lunge it forward and you're not able to get it all the way there, it can be really hard to actually disengage it without that added momentum. You can do it, it's just difficult, and sometimes it doesn't like to work at all. And it leads me to my biggest gripe about this set. So this function takes a pretty decent amount of force to actually work. First off, you can see just the sheer number of rubber bands on the set. There are 6 of them, which is not unlike the Muwaka and Kanera, but they're under different kinds of stress compared to those sets, right? And when we lunge the character forward, do you see what's going on right around here, right around this axle specifically? The body actually starts to bend around that point. You can actually see these two lift arms, this blue one up here, this gray one here, which are parallel right now, sort of start to pinch together. I have seen these arrive in parts lots where those pieces are broken. In fact, I kept some of them, although I don't know where currently. I saw them just the other day too, but I kept some of them specifically from the Gadak set that had completely sheared the bottom sides of those connectors. It's these L-shaped lift arms on the inside here that are the weak point in part. And those are parts that do break readily easily, just generally. So if you have those parts snap on a model like this, it's a really big weak point for it. I think it's sort of the main pitfall that this set ends up kind of suffering from, right? But otherwise, I think overall the aesthetic of the set more than makes up for it. I think it looks fantastic, honestly. And it starts to sort of venture in the direction of more specialized builds. So what do I mean by that? Well, this build does do a lot of things that previous like Rahi sets did, where it introduces Bionicle pieces but sort of slaps them onto a Technic base. You can see that here as well with stuff like the Bahrag bodies, which are for all intents and purposes just kind of slapped onto a otherwise Technic frame. And that works for this model. But as you start to go into the legs a little bit, you see that they're more heavily reliant on those Bionicle pieces. As you go up into the head, you can see it is a little bit more reliant on those Bionicle pieces, notably that Onua claw and those teeth in there. And I have to set aside a little bit of time to admire the sculpting on this head, because I look back at a set like Ultimate Duma, for example, which uses similar teeth on that model, although different and not as, obviously not as effective. It's not a function in that set. I think their first attempt at making something involving teeth with that Onua claw, obviously minus like the Nui Jaga, was kind of perfect. This attempt right here, it is so condensed. That head build is a thing of beauty, honestly, and yet it's so straightforward. It's so satisfying to build. And it's so easy to build and understand how it works once it is all together. Yet they were able to shove so many things in there to make sure that everything functioned correctly. This triangular piece on the inside here helps to keep these sides from splitting apart from that biting force. The same happens with this thin lift arm here. Even this pin here, which can help to grab onto this, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but even that pin here also acts as a stopper colliding with this blue lift arm at the very top here, so that these Bahrag teeth don't actually shear the sides of these Onua claws, since they are a polypropylene material, and that is ABS, right? So all things told, LEGO did an incredible job sculpting a head like this to make something that looks pretty good from most angles. I will say from the front, it's a little bit derpy with how wide it is, but I don't think it looks bad per se. It just looks a little bit interesting. It's definitely not the most intimidating aesthetic from the front. But speaking of this, you'll notice that I did not include the axle in the front of it, mostly just because it was kind of unsightly, and I didn't care to add it. I'm not worried about trying to play with this one too much right now, though I may test it in the mask game. That'll be in the future. I plan to do so with the Boxer as well anyway. But that said, though, the idea is that when you get one of these sets, it comes with two of these builds, near identical with the exception of these tubes on the top of Karak here and fins on the top of Garak's set. But otherwise, functionally, they are identical to each other. And the idea is that you can fight them in much the same way that you could fight the Rahi from 2001, but instead of trying to knock masks off, you're actually trying to do kind of the Muwaka thing again, too. So a lot of similarities here between this set and Muwaka. What do I mean by that? Well, in that set, there are masks on its shoulders, but they're connected to these stalks. And the idea is that when you lunge at that character, if you attack that character with one of your other sets, notably another set within that same build, the Kane-Ra, for example, you bite onto the mask. That's good enough, right? But as the neck retracts, it pulls that mask and the stalk with it out. When the stalk is removed, the arm falls off. What purpose does that serve? I don't know. You could see it as disabling it in terms of the story, right? It can't hold itself up anymore, so it can't like get around. Whatever you might think of, it works, but it is a little bit weird. However, this function actually disables, because what this one does is the teeth and the mouth in general is designed to wrap around that axle to grab that and pull the whole thing out. And now you saw this whole assembly right here launch up inside of the model. And what you'll notice is when it goes up in there, yeah, just like that, it's locked. I can't use it anymore. It's so perfect. And it's really smart too. I didn't show this off, but it only has one rubber band on the backside, even though you can see it has two of these connectors here. Would have been very easy to include rubber bands on both sides, but there's actually a reason why it does not have a rubber band on both sides. Because the spacing in here that this slides up in between is ever so slightly thicker by maybe a half a millimeter, ever so slightly thicker than the two lift arms that are stacked. So what happens is it doesn't just pull the lift arm assembly upward, but actually pulls it backward into the model very slightly. And that's actually important because it helps it pass a black connector inside the body right there. It's a little bit hard to see. It's buried down in there pretty good, but you can see the two pins right beside each other. That right there is the actual lock mechanism. When this is out, the neck is able to move fully because that is not preventing anything from moving. But as I retract the neck, you can see how it works. It's so clean and satisfying the way that that all comes together. And I will say that that's just the whole vibe I get from this set. Clean, aesthetic, fun to play with, and it just looks like, in a lot of ways, an improvement on things that came before. Do I like it better than previous Rahi? No. I am biased towards Rahi in general. They are my favorite thing to come from Bionicle. And though I can absolutely look past this story role that this plays and see this as a Rahi, I still like things like Moaka a little bit better. I like the assembly of that model, and I like how the mechanism in that one functions. This mechanism is a lot more straightforward, but sometimes that's all it needs. And I have heard people talk about how the teeth in the gears skip and wear down and grind down. And I have not had any issues with that at all, because there is such a thing as like the path of least resistance, right? What ends up happening is when the neck is being extended, it kind of pushes the whole model forward a little bit. I did not show it well there. And so as it goes past, yeah, that gear is grinding past the gear, but the brunt of that force is taken in by these rubber bands. So it doesn't actually damage the gears, at least not to any notable degree. Now, one thing that definitely can get damaged on this model is these Onua claws. Again, because they are polypropylene, because they're part of that striking force that this thing has, right? They're gonna get nicked up. There's really no way around it. Obviously, I've used clean ones here, but when you buy this set used or you find it out in the wild, it's definitely going to have some dental problems for sure. And that's just something that you'll have to get around, unfortunately. There are plenty of these that float around in the community, thankfully, that are in good condition. Thankfully, sets like the Nui Jaga, for example, don't really use them to any degree that damages them, though they definitely can be in that set. Terakava, quite the same thing there as well. But here, this set really puts them most in harm's way. So what are my overall thoughts in summary on the Bahrag? I think that they are fantastic sets. I don't necessarily think that they are a set that you need to get both of. Now, obviously, they're usually sold in a pair because that's how they were released, but you definitely can find singular versions of them out there in the wild. And at some point in time, maybe I'll even go over this set as well and build a alternate model for it, like I have done with most of the 2001 Rahi as well. But in summary, I think the set is an excellent set. Really, it's only hampered by, as I've mentioned, that sort of L-shaped lift arm back inside of here. It is a notably fragile piece, though I have not had any issues myself with it breaking, thankfully. I'm also not somebody who really plays with this model all that much. It's definitely something that when you play with it, it feels like something's going to give. It feels like something is going to break. I haven't had it happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did. And it's mostly because of just the sheer amount of force that goes into the function like this. LEGO was very smart in how they accounted for specific sizes of rubber bands in the earlier years and how each of those rubber bands sort of played off of each other. A perfect model to look at for an example of that would be the Star Wars 8002 Destroyer droid, which uses a lot of different sizes of rubber bands, all of which are fairly essential, and even has several different revisions of that set, including different types of rubber bands to fix certain errors from previous versions, because it's a very complicated set. And that's something that we saw a decent amount in 2001 Rahi as well, notably, again, the Moaka and Kane Rahi. Right here, however, there's only two sizes of rubber bands being used, and I think that they're used to good effect. However, I also think that at the same time, maybe some of these rubber bands could have been swapped out for larger or smaller sizes, if only to sort of balance that feel, that feedback that it has, because it definitely has it. And overall, I think otherwise, it's a really good model. It can defend itself, as people say, by putting its arms in front of this to keep it from coming out. And of course, the tension on this, generally speaking, because of that rubber band always pulling up on it, is going to keep it in place pretty snug as well. And in terms of posability, there's not much else to look at here. Legs jointed at the knees, sort of a digitigrade kind of aesthetic. I've heard a lot of people call this like the Raptor-Chicken. Yeah, you can see it for sure. Ankle as well, and the ankle can swivel, which is nice, but there's really nothing to do with it once you do it. You know, no big deal. Outside of that, you do get posability in the wrist if you break that connection there, which is intentional, obviously, but it's not super notable. Outside of that, not a whole lot of posability, but many of the Rahi from 2001 don't have a lot of external posability. It's all sort of feature based. So that's everything for this video. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe because it really helps the channel out and it helps, of course, in the algorithm as well. On top of that, if you want to check out things like my Discord, Instagram, or Patreon, all of those are linked in the description below. And let me know your thoughts. Did you ever get the Bahrag when they first released, or have you acquired it since then? And what are your thoughts? Also, have you ever built the combination model? I have not. That's actually a new one for me, so I may do that at some point in the future. I don't have high hopes for it, but hey, maybe I'll be surprised. Till next time.